Welcome. In this video, we are going to start seeing concepts for Chapter 1 book's project Take Shape. This is going to be a big week. To get the ball rolling, we will talk about user stories, what they are, how they work, and why they are so important. Then, we'll cover the definition of done, acceptance criteria, sprint planning, and act to learn. All right, let's get into user stories. These are simple descriptions of features from the perspective of the end user. In Agile, a user story is the basic unit of work, and its sole focus is on what the user wants to achieve, not on what we think they should or will want. So, what are user stories? Essentially, a user story answers three fundamental questions. Who is the user? What do they want to do? Why do they want to do it? The format is straightforward. As a user, I want action so that benefit. Let's break that down. The user is the person who will use the feature. It could be a customer, an employee, or a confused parent trying to buy a book online at 2 a.m. The action describes what they want to do. It could be something like find a book, register for an event, or check out without entering my credit card info for the 10th time. The benefit explains why the user wants to do it, what they get out of it. For instance, so that I can read the book I've been hearing about, or so that I don't have to navigate the labyrinth of my wallet every time I check out. Here's a real example for Chapter 1 books. As a returning customer, I want to save my payment information so that I can check out faster in the future. Notice how this example is specific but doesn't get into how you build it or what technology you use. It focuses on the user and their goal, keeping everyone aligned on why the feature exists. Okay, but why are user stories important? Because they help everyone, developers, designers, product managers, focus on what matters, delivering value to the user. They prevent the project from becoming a game of telephone, where the original message, add a login feature, somehow morphs into build a time machine. By keeping things simple and to the point, user stories ensure we understand what the user really needs and why. Let's look at how to write a good user story. You already know the basic format, but there's more to it than just filling in the blanks. Here are some guidelines to ensure your user story gets the job done using the INVEST criteria. 1. Independent. Each story should stand on its own. For example, a story about logging in should not depend on another story about resetting a password. 2. Negotiable. The story is a starting point, not a detailed contract. It's there to spark discussion and allow for flexibility. If a story says, as a user, I want to receive a weekly email, you should be able to negotiate on the content, the look, or even if an email is the best solution. 3. Valuable. Each story must provide value to the user. Ask yourself, if I completed this story, would it make someone's life easier or better? If the answer is no, it's time to rethink. 4. Estimable. You need to be able to estimate the effort required to complete the story. If you have a story that's too vague, like improve search functionality, it's like saying, make dinner better. Make it better how? By adding cheese? The answer is usually yes, by the way. So you need to break it down into specific, actionable pieces. 5. Small. Stories should be small enough to complete in a single iteration or sprint. A story like, as a user, I want to browse books by genre is manageable. But as a user, I want a personalized book recommendation engine is like asking for a 4-course meal when you just needed a sandwich. Number 6. Testable. There should be a clear way to verify that the story is complete and working as intended. For example, if your story is, as a user, I want to receive a confirmation email after purchasing a book, you should be able to test that an email is actually sent and looks correct. Let's look at some examples to understand the difference between effective and ineffective user stories. First, an effective example might be, as an event organizer, I want to update the event schedule so that attendees always see the latest information. This story is clear, concise, and valuable. We know who the user is, event organizer, what they want, update the schedule, and why, to provide the latest information. But an ineffective example of that might be, as a user, I want to manage my account. This is too vague. What does manage my account mean? Update the password? Change the address? Cancel the account? You need to be specific to it to ensure everyone understands what's actually needed. Being too vague, overly technical, or too broad are three common mistakes in writing user stories. Avoid vague statements. For example, instead of saying improve site speed, say, as a user, I want the website to load within 3 seconds so that I don't abandon my cart. Be specific about the improvement needed and ensure the story is actionable. Focus user stories on needs, not technical details. For instance, implement OAuth 2.0 for password reset is too technical. A better approach is, as a user, I want to reset my password so that I can access my account. And finally, avoid making stories too broad. For example, as a user, I want to manage my entire account from A to Z is too general. A better approach is to break it down into smaller, actionable pieces, like, as a user, I want to update my email address so that I can receive notifications. To write effective user stories, start by looking at real-life scenarios from your project. Talk to your users, in this case, customers and employees of Chapter 1 books. Find out their pain points and what they wish they could do more easily. For example, imagine a customer at Chapter 1 books trying to find a book for their book club. They might say, I always struggle to find books by the same author. From this, we could craft a user story. As a book club member, I want to search books by author so that I can quickly find all books written by my favorite authors. Now that we've established what user stories are, how to write them effectively, and why they are crucial, let's talk about how user stories apply specifically to the Chapter 1 Books project. Our goal here is to understand who is responsible for writing user stories, how they are presented in an Agile environment, and how they evolve and are refined over time. In an Agile environment, user stories are typically written by stakeholders who have a deep understanding of the end user's needs. This includes customers, employees, and community members who regularly interact with the Chapter 1 Books platform or physical store. For example, a customer might suggest a story like, as a reader, I want to receive personalized book recommendations so that I can discover new books that match my interests. While stakeholders provide the content for user stories, the product owner or business analyst facilitates this process. Their role is to help stakeholders articulate their needs clearly and align these needs with the project's goals. They ensure the stories are well-formed, valuable, and actionable. So, while the end user or stakeholder might be the source of the story, it's the job of the product owner to make sure it fits into the Agile framework. Once user stories are created, they are presented to the development team during a session called backlog refinement or grooming. During these sessions, the team reviews all the user stories in the backlog, ensuring they are clear, well-defined, and ready for the upcoming sprint. For example, the product owner might present a user story like, as a bookstore visitor, I want to be able to scan a QR code to quickly find additional information about a book so that I can decide whether to purchase it. The team would then discuss this story, ensuring it meets the INVEST criteria: independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. They might ask questions like, what specific information should be displayed when the QR code is scanned? Or, how quickly should the information load? The team will also estimate the effort required to complete each story, often using techniques like planning poker or t-shirt sizing. We will cover how to do that in a few weeks, but just know for now that these estimates help in deciding how many stories the team can realistically commit to during the next sprint. Stories are then prioritized based on their value to the user and alignment with business goals. User stories are not static. They evolve throughout the project. As the team receives new information or feedback, stories may be refined, added, or even removed. This is a continuous process of learning and adapting to ensure the project remains aligned with user needs and business objectives. For instance, initially, a story might say, as a user, I want to browse books by genre. However, after gathering feedback, the team may find that users also want to filter by other criteria, such as publication date or rating. This feedback could lead to refining the original story or adding new, smaller stories to cover these additional requirements. In a real Agile environment, expect to see user stories that are continuously being updated. The goal is to keep them relevant and valuable. If a story no longer aligns with the project's direction or the user's needs, it can be removed from the backlog. On the other hand, New stories can emerge as new user needs are identified or as the business goals evolve. Now that we've covered user stories and their role in Agile projects, it's time to talk about two key concepts that ensure those stories are completed correctly: the definition of done, DoD, and acceptance criteria. Both play an essential role in guiding the work of an Agile team, but they serve different purposes. First, let's talk about the definition of done, or DoD. In Agile, the definition of done is a shared understanding among the team of what it means for a task, story, or project to be considered complete. Think of it as a checklist that applies to every user story or task the team works on, regardless of its specific content. The purpose of the DoD is to ensure that all work meets a certain quality standard before it is considered done. Having a clear and consistent DoD prevents misunderstandings and reduces the risk of releasing unfinished or low-quality work. It also helps the team deliver features that are truly ready for use, not just done enough. A good definition of done should be clear, meaning everyone on the team understands what done means. Specific, meaning it includes detailed criteria that must be met. Measurable, meaning the completion of each item can be verified objectively. And it has to be achievable. It should be realistic given the team's capabilities and project constraints. Now let's move on to acceptance criteria. These are the specific conditions that a user story must satisfy to be considered complete from the perspective of the end user or stakeholder. Unlike the DoD, which applies across the board, acceptance criteria are unique to each user story or task. Acceptance criteria generally include three main components. Preconditions: what needs to be in place before the story can begin. Scenarios: descriptions of different situations or uses that the feature must handle. Expected outcomes: the results that should occur when the scenarios are met. To help you understand the difference between DoD and acceptance criteria, let's use an analogy: painting a house. The definition of done is like the general standards and procedures that all painters in a company must follow, no matter what job they're on. For example, every time they paint, they must prepare the surface properly, use a specific type of paint, apply 2 coats, clean up the site afterward, and ensure no paint drips are left. These are the rules that apply to every painting job. On the other hand, acceptance criteria are specific to the individual job. If the painters are working on Mrs. Johnson's house, her acceptance criteria might include painting the walls a particular shade of blue, ensuring that all baseboards are painted white, and that no paint gets on her new hardwood floors. These are the unique requirements for that specific job, things that must be done to Mrs. Johnson's satisfaction. So, while the DoD is a general checklist that applies to every user story, like the steps that every painter follows on every job, the acceptance criteria are tailored to the specific needs of the task at hand, like the unique requirements for painting Mrs. Johnson's house. We need both the DoD and acceptance criteria to ensure that each piece of work is complete and meets both general quality standards and the specific needs of the user. The DoD helps keep the team aligned and consistent across all their work, while the acceptance criteria ensure that each user story fulfills its unique requirements. Let's wrap up this lecture by covering how to apply the Act to Learn principles from the textbook to the Chapter 1 Books project. The Act to Learn approach is all about taking action to gain insights, rather than overanalyzing or overplanning before getting started. It's a key principle in Agile, where learning comes from doing and adapting based on what we learn along the way. The core idea behind Act to Learn is that you don't wait until you know everything to make a decision or take a step forward. Instead, you act. You take a calculated risk, run experiments, test assumptions, and learn from the results. This approach is essential in environments where things are uncertain or rapidly changing, like in Agile projects. In the context of Agile, Act to Learn means continuously iterating based on feedback and adapting to new information. For the Chapter 1 Books project, this could involve testing new features or changes on a small scale, gathering user feedback, and then deciding the next steps based on that feedback. Let's break down the key principles of Act to Learn and how they can be applied to our project. 1. Define your assumptions. Start by identifying what you believe to be true about your users or your product. For example, you might assume that customers prefer to browse books by genre rather than by author. This assumption becomes something you need to test. 2. Decide what you need to learn first. Focus on what is most critical to learn right now. For instance, if the project is at an early stage, understanding how customers navigate the website might be more crucial than determining the most effective marketing channels. Identify the key question that, if answered, would give you the most valuable insight. 3. Design experiments to test your assumptions. Create small, simple experiments to test your assumptions and learn quickly. For example, you could A/B test 2 versions of the website's navigation, one organized by genre and one by author, and measure which one leads to more sales or longer user engagement. 4. Gather data and feedback. Use both qualitative and quantitative data to learn from your experiments. This might involve reviewing analytics, conducting user surveys, or holding focus groups. For example, after running your navigation test, you could gather data on click-through rates and ask users about their experience. 5. Adapt based on what you learn. The most important step is to take what you've learned and use it to make informed decisions moving forward. If the data shows that users overwhelmingly prefer browsing by genre, you might decide to prioritize that feature in the next sprint. If feedback indicates that users are confused by the current checkout process, you could refine your user stories to address this pain point. So, how we can bring these principles to life in the Chapter 1 Books project. Suppose we start with the assumption that users want personalized book recommendations based on their reading history. To test this, we might implement a simple prototype of a recommendation feature for a small subset of users. We could track whether these users engage more with the website and whether they purchase more books as a result. If the experiment shows positive results, we continue refining the feature and rolling it out to more users. If not, we analyze the feedback, adjust our assumptions, and design a new experiment. Maybe users don't find the recommendations helpful, or they want recommendations based on a different criterion, like books that are trending in their community. We adapt and try again, continuously learning from each action we take. Wow! That was a lot of content today. But that's all I have for you in this video. So do us a favor and nail it down, polish it up, and pretend this lecture was shorter than it was. And as always, I thank you for your attention.